Bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler d'un personnage emblématique de Silent Hill. Elle s'appelle Alessa Gillespie. Genre femme. Âge à l'origine 7 ans. Pendant les événements de Silent Hill, 14 ans. C'est une élève primaire de Midwich. Une patiente à l'hôpital d'Alchimia, âgée de 7 ans à 14 ans. Statut renaît en tant que hater Cheryl Manson. Affiliation mère d'Alia Gillespie. Second mi-temps, Cheryl Manson. Réincarnation, Ethers Manson. Début Silent Hill. Doubleur Sandra Wayne, Silent Hill. Jennifer Woodward, origine. Alessa Gillespie est un personnage majeur de la série Silent Hill, qui fait ses débuts dans le premier jeu Silent Hill. Elle est présentée comme la force motrice et l'un des personnages les plus influents derrière les événements de la série. Il se révèle peu à peu qu'Alessa a une enfance très sombre, violente, traumatisante et abusive. Alessa a été victime d'intimidation, battue, torturée et incendiée lorsqu'elle était enfant. Son immolation et ses souffrances extrêmes causées par le culte de sa mère, l'ordre de Valkiel, dans le but de faire renaître son dieu, ont servi de catalyseur à l'état actuel déformé et tordu du mystérieux pouvoir spirituel de Silent Hill. En plus d'être un élément important du canon du jeu, Alessa joue également un rôle majeur dans l'adaptation cinématographique de Silent Hill, ainsi que dans sa suite. Bibliographie, début de la vie, la maison des Gillespie. Alessa Gillespie était une fille unique de Dahlia Gillespie, une médium spiritualiste, une Miko, dans un certain culte connu sous le nom de l'ordre de Valkiel, qui a été établi à Silent Hill. La pègre du maire Dahlia et le père du maire du Maine, la pègre du Maine, Dahlia et Alessa vivaient ensemble dans une maison du quartier des affaires de Silent Hill. Toute information concernant le père d'Alessa est inconnue. Au moins d'une source affirme qu'Alessa a été créée par conjuration magique, par une secte fanatique au sein de l'ordre dirigé par Dahlia. En conséquence, la graine d'un dieu embryonnaire a été créée en elle. Dès son plus jeune âge, Dahlia a commencé à imposer sa religion à son enfant, Alessa. Elle a été endoctrinée par le culte et de sa mère, ses croyances et ses idées. Alessa rêvait de l'arrivée du paradis de l'ordre, une vision d'un monde utopique, sans mal humain, sans haine, sans cupidité, sans guerre, sans maladie, sans famine ou sans vieillesse. Alessa croyait que leur monde actuel devait être purifié par le feu. Avant de créer le paradis, Dahlia emmenait fréquemment Alessa à la chapelle de l'ordre. Alessa regardait souvent les vitraux qui représentaient Dieu et l'homme et la femme qui lui ont donné naissance. Alessa est venue adorer Dieu et demander que ses prières soient exaucées. Cependant, ce souhait n'a jamais été exaucé. Il y a une fille nommée Alessa dans ma classe. Si votre mémoire est bonne, vous vous souviendrez peut-être d'elle. C'est celle que j'ai dit qu'ils appelaient sorcière. Il est fort probable que sa mère la maltraitait. Tout le long de son voyage, même lorsqu'il l'aide continuellement. Elle reste silencieuse bien que Travis se fâche contre elle. Elle continue de l'utiliser pour ses projets. Après que Travis ait terminé les Fleuros, elle lui a montré ses pouvoirs de lévitation lors d'une confrontation entre lui et sa mère. À l'extérieur d'Alchimia, Travis a finalement trouvé le véritable corps d'Alessa dans un site rituel lié à Grain-Lion, où il a pu temporairement contrecarrer la motivation de la secte. Dans la bonne fin, lorsque Travis est enfin capable de remonter dans son camion, la projection astrale d'Alessa paraît brièvement tenant un bébé dans lequel une partie d'elle s'est réincarnée. Ce bébé, l'autre moitié d'Alessa, est ensuite retrouvé par Harry Manson et sa femme sur une route à l'extérieur de Silent Hill. Ils ont nommé le bébé Cheryl et ont commencé à l'élever comme leur propre fille. Entre l'origine et Silent Hill, la chambre d'Alessa à l'hôpital d'Alchimia où elle est restée alitée pendant 7 ans. Après les événements d'origine, Alessa a été transportée à l'hôpital d'Alchimia et cachée dans une pièce du sous-sol de l'hôpital par Dahlia et le directeur de l'hôpital, le docteur Michael Kaufman, qui avait avec elle une alliance centrée sur la drogue. Pour le public, on pensait qu'Alessa était morte. dans l'incendie est déclarée sainte. Par l'ordre en tant que mère de Dieu et fille de Dieu, seule Dahlia, Michael et quelques membres de l'ordre et une jeune infirmière travaillant à l'hôpital savaient qu'Alessa était encore en vie. Kaufman a ordonné au personnel de l'hôpital de ne pas entrer dans le sous-sol, mais a demandé à la jeune infirmière Lisa Garland de s'occuper d'Alessa. En échange, Lisa reçut du PTV de Kaufman. Alessa avait subi des brûlures couvrant tout son corps, qui étaient bien au-delà d'un niveau mortel, mais elle continua de vivre. C'est-à-dire qu'elle a été maintenue en vie, parce que la divinité malveillante protège le corps de sa mère et que Dahlia a lancé une incantation magique sur sa fille. De plus, Dahlia a continuellement infligé de la douleur à Alessa, dans cet état pendant 7 ans, au moyen d'une incantation qui a obligé la partie manquante de son âme à lui répondre. L'adolescente Alessa enceinte de Dieu au lit. Pendant 7 ans, Alessa a enduré sa souffrance parce qu'elle n'avait pas voulu détruire le petit bonheur, entre autres mois. Pouvait jouir, mais petit à petit, l'incantation de Dahlia réussit et elle est devenue plus que Alessa pouvait supporter. À un moment donné, alors qu'Alessa était adolescente, Lisa lui a secrètement offert un cadeau, un journal dans lequel elle pouvait écrire ses pensées. Alessa écrit en avril qu'elle était presque prête à enlever ses bandages et elle a commencé à envier l'autre des enfants qui pouvaient jouer dehors. Un jour, elle a entendu un groupe de personnes discuter de ce qui semblait être une information importante à l'extérieur de sa chambre. Alessa a également découvert qu'elle allait recevoir la visite d'une certaine personne. Silent Hill. La projection astrale d'Alessa provoquant l'accident de voiture de Harry Manson. Afin d'attirer la partie manquante de l'esprit d'Alessa vers son point d'origine, Dahlia a utilisé une fois à la fois un sort d'invocation et a intentionnellement maintenu sa fille dans un état de douleur atroce pendant plusieurs années pour contraindre Cheryl à revenir. Confinée au sous-sol de l'hôpital d'Alchemia, Alessa reçoit des drogues hallucinogènes, intensifiant encore ses tourments. Alessa, cependant, a décidé d'interférer avec la fin de partie de sa mère. Dans un agonie sans fin, Alessa a contacté Cheryl, l'appelant à la ville avec l'intention de réunir son âme et de se suicider, garantissant ainsi que le dieu ne pourrait jamais naître dans son ventre. Sentant Cheryl après de Silent Hill, Alessa utilisa sa projection astrale et marche devant le jeep des maçons faisant dévier Harry du bord de la route et d'une falaise. Cheryl est séparée d'un Harry inconscient et attiré vers Alessa. Au retour de Cheryl, les capacités psychiques latentes d'Alessa sont déclenchées et elle enveloppe Silent Hill de brouillard et d'une réalité altérée pour empêcher le plan de sa mère d'avancer. La plupart des changements drastiques qui surviennent dans la ville, dans le jeu, tels que les horribles créatures qui viennent l'habiter, sont l'issue de son imagination et de ses illustrations. Alors qu'il recherche Cheryl disparue, à Silent Hill, Harry est manipulé par Dahlia en lui faisant croire qu'Alessa possède la marque de Samael, qui est la marque d'un démon. Alessa pousse Harry par la télékinésie, en lui demande d'utiliser un objet sacré, le fleuros, pour empêcher Alessa de compléter les 5 emblèmes de Samael et de plonger définitivement la ville entière dans une dimension alternative. Infernal, connu sous le nom de l'autre monde, mordant à l'hameçon, Harry se rend au parc d'attractions Laxide et neutralise Alessa pour apprendre qu'elle essayait en réalité de contenir elle-même l'autre monde avec le sceau de Métatron, qui est un talisman récurrent dans Silent Hill 3. À la fin du jeu, Dahlia capture finalement Alessa qui s'est recombinée avec Cheryl immédiatement après l'incident de voiture et l'utilise pour donner naissance à Dieu. En fonction des actions du joueur, tout au long du jeu, Alessa émerge sous l'une des 2 formes distinctes de la divinité, sous la forme d'une figure sereine vêtue d'un blanc nommé l'incubateur, soit sous l'incubus démoniaque, ce dernier étant le résultat de l'ancienne associée de Dahlia, le docteur Kaufman jetant un échantillon d'Aglapophotis sur Alessa pour expulser prématurément le dieu. Dans les 2 cas, la divinité née tua Dahlia et combat Harry en tant que boss final. Alessa tenant le bébé de la réincarnation d'elle-même. Après la défaite de l'incube, l'apparition disparue d'Alessa crée un portail vers le monde réel pour permettre à Harry de s'échapper. Après lui avoir remis un nouveau qui continue l'âme fusionnée d'elle-même et de Cheryl, Alessa montre alors une lumière comme chemin, permettant à Harry de s'échapper. Harry regarde la réincarnation d'Alessa et réfléchit à ce qu'il doit faire. et décide finalement de la porter avec lui pendant qu'il s'échappe. Alessa, avec ses forces restantes, arrête le feu, entourant Harry avant de s'effondrer au sol. Dès lors l'âme d'Alessa perdure dans le nouveau bébé qu'Harry nomma Ether, sans aucun souvenir de sa vie antérieure en tant qu'Alessa. Ether mène une vie sans douleur ni souffrance. La vie d'Alessa avait voulu dans Silent Hill 3. Ether se souvient de qui était et de ce qui est arrivé à son père à Silent Hill 17 ans avant le match. Portland et affaire de meurtre. Un Harry d'âge moyen avec Cheryl Ether. Après avoir échappé à Silent Hill, Harry a vécu une vie ordinaire à Portland avec sa nouvelle fille. Adoptive, Harry n'était pas sûr de pouvoir élever le bébé, il a même envisagé de la tuer, de l'étrangler et de l'abandonner parce qu'il soupçonnait que le bébé était une réincarnation d'Alessa. Et Alessa était responsable de lui avoir enlevé Cheryl. Les soupçons d'Harry étaient finalement exacts, même si on ne sait pas si Harry s'est rendu compte qu'une partie de ce bébé contenait également l'âme réincarnée de Cheryl. Que le bébé soit ou non la réincarnation d'Alessa, Harry a finalement décidé de pardonner à Alessa et d'élever le bébé. Il a également décidé de nommer à nouveau le bébé Cheryl, probablement parce que Jody l'a choisi et qu'il voulait honorer sa discipline, ainsi que sa précédente fille adoptive. Cependant, il se sentit plus tard que ce monde était une erreur, puisqu'à l'époque, Harry la considérait comme un remplacement pour sa Cheryl perdue. L'organisation religieuse de Silent Hill avait prévu d'enlever Cheryl Alessa, réincarnée, et s'est mise à sa recherche. 5 ans après les événements du premier jeu, Harry a tué un membre de la secte en état de légitime défense. Le membre de la secte a tenté de kidnapper Cheryl Alessa réincarnée. Harry a été acquitté par le tribunal et transféré dans une autre ville pour se cacher incognito. Pour assurer la sécurité de sa fille adoptive, il a teint ses cheveux de brun à blond et l'a renommée Cheryl en Ether. Par la suite, il s'est finalement installé avec elle dans les appartements Daisy Villa. Même s'il se sentait confus et frustré quant à qui il pourrait être, Harry était déterminé à l'élever. Sainté, une peinture de Sainte Alessa dans la chapelle de l'ordre. Quelque temps après Silent Hill et avant Silent Hill 3, au cours de cette période 17 ans, Alessa a été déclarée sainte par l'ordre en tant que sainte mère de Dieu et fille de Dieu. C'est extrêmement ironique car Alessa est devenue une sainte de la religion même qu'elle méprisait ses motivations dans l'origine, et Silent Hill était d'arrêter le culte et d'empêcher la naissance de Dieu, mais l'ordre a manipulé la vérité pour donner l'impression qu'Alessa voulait donner naissance à un Dieu et propager sa mission du paradis de l'ordre. Alors qu'Alessa rêvait effectivement du paradis qu'elle changeait d'avis et décida qu'un paradis provoqué par un Dieu aussi démoniaque ne serait pas adéquat. Colline silencieuse 3, Silent Hill 3. Dans Silent Hill 3, 17 ans après les événements du premier jeu Silent Hill, la réincarnation d'Alessa Ether est approchée par Claudia Wolf, qui est désormais prêtresse de l'ordre. Claudia a l'intention de provoquer la descente du dieu culte pour inaugurer le paradis. Pour que cela se reproduise, Ether doit se souvenir de son vrai moi, Alessa. Ether a encore de la semence de Dieu en elle. La raison n'est pas tout à fait, c'est peut-être parce qu'une partie de Dieu était encore à l'intérieur d'Alessa. Lorsqu'elle s'est réincarnée à cause de Claudia, ou que les propres peurs de Ether l'ont manifesté, quoi qu'il en soit, Ether a l'âge mûr de l'accouchement. Pour nourrir le fœtus grandissant de Ether avec la haine, aussi comme 17 ans de vengeance pour avoir amené Alessa, Claudia, fait assassiner Harry pendant le jeu. Ether retrouve lentement ses souvenirs d'être Alessa. Pendant ce temps, Alessa est surveillée par Valkiel. Le souvenir d'Alessa est l'Happy Carousel. Le souvenir d'Alessa est une émotion sombre imitant l'image d'Ether, et rencontrée par Ether dans le parc d'attractions Lakeside de Silent Hill sur le Happy Carousel. La mémoire d'Alessa attaque Ether en tant que chef ennemi avec l'intention de mettre fin à la vie de Ether, elle-même pour lui échapper ainsi qu'à tous les autres de nouvelles souffrances après la naissance de Dieu. En mourant, elle laisse un message imprimé avec du sang sur le sol du carrousel. Le message laissé par la mémoire d'Alessa révèle son intention de se libérer, elle-même des souffrances qu'elle doit endurer en tant que mère de Dieu. Il vaudrait mieux que moi-même meure après tout ce qu'il n'y a pas avoir peur. Cet enfant, ce démon. Quand je pense la douleur sans fin qu'il apportera à sa naissance. J'ai décidé qu'au lieu de la souffrance et de la cruauté, j'ai enduré dans cette chambre de malade. Je voudrais accorder à moi-même une mort plus douce, plus paisible. Pourquoi est-ce que je résiste? Je n'ai jamais pensé à moi-même, comme une imbécile. En réponse à cela, Ethers dit: Alessa, je suppose que c'est un peu étrange pour moi de t'appeler ainsi puisque tu es moi. Mais tu sais quoi, toi et moi, nous ne pensons pas de la même chose, après tout. Et ce n'est pas non plus que je ne me souvienne pas de cette chambre de malade. Ethers entre ensuite dans la chapelle de l'ordre qu'Alessa avait l'habitude de visiter dans l'antre. Claudia salue Ethers et Ethers commence à parler à Alessa en appelant Claudia, sa petite Claudia, et sa chère et douce sœur. Ethers, Alessa dit qu'elle est bien dans le monde tel qu'il est. On ne sait pas s'il s'agissait réellement d'Alessa ou simplement de Ethers, prétendant être elle pour manipuler Claudia. La chapelle se confond avec les manifestations des souvenirs du passé, Alessa comme son école primaire. Et sa chambre dans 2 cas, Ethers peut retrouver des empreintes de pas sanglants et entendre des pleurs dans ce qui mènera à une peinture d'ange, ainsi qu'à la chambre de malade d'Alessa. On ne sait pas s'il s'agit d'un reste d'Alessa ou Lisa ou une autre chose. Dieu ressemble légèrement à Alessa. Lors d'une confrontation avec Claudia, Ethers avale un comprimé d'aglophotis que lui a donné son père, la faisant vomir Dieu hors de son corps. Claudia dévore désespérément le fœtus pour donner naissance à Dieu, elle-même étant née du ventre de Claudia. Dieu réapparaît en tant que patron et ressemble à Alessa en raison de l'association mentale de Claudia entre Dieu et Alessa. Ethers survit à l'épreuve et on peut présumer qu'elle mène une vie de plus heureuse par la suite. Elle revient également en son nom d'origine de Cheryl. Si l'on en croit la fin idiote du jeu, Cheryl divorce et est une jeune maman qui fait cavalier seule, avec 2 enfants. Si cela est vrai et réellement canon, il est possible que ces 2 enfants aient hérité de certains pour des pouvoirs psychiques d'Alessa. Ethers, Cheryl, mais sa vie après Silent Hill 3 est restée un mystère. Une autre explication est que la description dans la chanson d'elle, en tant que mère célibataire de 2 enfants, elle est simplement une référence au fait qu'Alessa, Cheryl et Ethers ont existé en tant que 3 individus, distincts à différentes périodes de l'histoire, d'où une jeune maman, en quelque sorte, et 2 enfants. Personnalité. Alessa, en tant que jeune fille, endure une grande tragédie, ostracisée et maltraitée par un système cruel d'exploitation et de solitude. Elle est déprimée, suicidaire et trop souvent incomprise, selon les commentaires faits par sa réincarnation. Ethers, maçonne, Alessa s'ennuyait toujours et était triste. Il est montré à travers ses yeux et ceux de Harry Manson qu'Alessa a trouvé un répit lorsqu'elle s'est enfuie vers d'autres mondes, à travers la fantaisie, pour faire face et se réconforter dans la face à sa dure réalité. Parfois Alessa semble se replier complètement sur elle, mais peut-être à cause d'années de traumatisme, car il arrive souvent qu'elle ne répond plus lorsqu'elle est interrogée par Harry Manson ou Travis Grady. Alessa souhaitait un monde paisible, plein d'empathie, d'amour. L'absence d'amour parental et le fait d'être victime d'intimidation de la part de ses camarades de classe peuvent être la cause de son attachement à certains personnages comme Claudia Wolf et Lisa Garland, ainsi que Douglas Kirkland et Harry dans le rôle de Ethers. Altruiste dans l'âme, elle se souciait de sa seconde moitié et de sa réincarnation plus que d'elle-même, voulant leur épargner le cauchemar infernal qu'elle avait enduré aux mains de sa mère, violente de sa sœur. En tant que Ethers, elle aimait Harry Manson en tant que père et peut-être aussi en raison de ces 7 années d'amour et de soins qu'il avait accordés à son autre moitié. Cheryl pour avoir aidé à mettre fin au tourment d'Alessa et à réaliser son souhait d'être acceptée et aimée. L'histoire d'Alessa parle de trouver la force intérieure et la persévérance malgré le fait d'être entourée et influencée par des personnes dépravées, sans cœur. Alessa incarne un personnage tellement et déterminé, elle possède une volonté et une force étonnante, démontrée et endurant résolument 7 longues années de la douleur, de misère et de la folie, en refusant de se laisser utiliser. Alessa a également beaucoup de colère et principalement envers les membres responsables de ses souffrances. Le côté le plus montré dans sa métier en Belgique. Alessa est également connue pour être vague, maîtrisée et sombre dans une certaine mesure. Mais non sans raison, ce côté vient probablement du fait d'être victime du traitement cruel et malveillant de ses pères, de sa mère et de Dieu, dont elle n'était pas volontairement inclinée. La réincarnation d'autres mondes d'Alessa est plein de sang de monstres de cadavres. D'autres mondes folklore. Dans le premier jeu, et de Silent les images sont surréalistes, des centaines de cadavres maltraités et en décomposition, les civières ensemble littéralement l'enfer sur terre. Cela est dit au Dieu dans son ventre qui a nourrissé continuellement d'horreur une machine de pensée négative. Le bonheur est une manifestation cynophonique. Alessa avait de multiples peurs, elle avait peur des machines cynophoniques, des insectes entomophobiques, des vers, des serpents, pyrophobiques, et même des serpents qui avaient les monstres de Silent Hill sont des manifestations de ces horreurs. Alessa gardait une collection de papiers dans sa chambre de deux poupées, une qu'elle nommait Scarlett, et dormait souvent avec elle. Alessa dessinait des monstres lorsqu'elle était seule. Elle adorait jouer aux jeux d'art, les gars, généralement elle aimait également la littérature, notamment Alice au pays des merveilles, le merveilleux magicien d'eau ou l'auteur rose. Cendrillon, le monde perdu, peut-être Edgar à la vie. Macbeth dans le rôle d'Edgar. Apparence physique, Silent Hill. Portrait d'Alessa à l'école de Woodbridge, 7 ans. Alessa n'a fait pas les cheveux chacun qui apparaissaient noirs sur certains éclairages. Enfant, elle a avec les cheveux courts sans que le cheval. Sa face est vraiment le côté droit principal. La tenue d'école d'Alessa s'inspire elle porte des chaussettes blanches, des chaussettes argentiques. Adolescente, Alessa a ses longs cheveux noirs attachés à son masque, un coup de cheval. L'homme parfois que la elle porte également bien qu'elle apparaisse faisant les illustrations sur le modèle de jeu, probablement appelé des graphismes. Alors que le vrai corps d'Alessa porte des brûlures ou des bandages, elle est même vue complètement ouverte dans un fauteuil roulant vers la fin du jeu. Sa projection astrale se manifeste sous la forme d'une adolescente portant d'anciens uniformes scolaires. Dans sa forme incubateur, les cheveux d'Alessa sont plus en queue, gérale et elle porte ses cheveux raides. Elle confie également une longue robe blanche. Silent Hill origine, comparaison de Silent Hill. Alessa a cheveux portants en apparence. Elle porte ses cheveux au cou de cheval avec sa frange, couvrant le côté gauche du visage par opposition au côté droit. Son uniforme scolaire apporte une cravache. Il n'y a aucun bouton représenté sur son uniforme scolaire auparavant. Pouvoir et capacité. Alessa est apparemment née avec des pouvoirs psychiques. Cependant, si elle avait vécu dans des circonstances normales, ses pouvoirs se manifesteraient presque jamais. Il convient également de noter que même si Dahlia a pu faire de la magie, cela ne signifie pas qu'elle possédait des pouvoirs spéciaux. Ainsi, il est possible que le fait que la divinité malveillante habitait dans son corps et soumise à Cheryl ait conduit Alessa à acquérir des pouvoirs surnaturels. Projection astrale. Alessa pouvait contrôler et concentrer sa projection astrale, lui permettant d'échapper aux limites de son corps brûlé, comme l'a mentionné Ethers. Elle pourrait même tuer quelqu'un par la seule pensée, projetant son désir de tuer dans le corps de la victime. Prémonition. Alessa possédait naturellement certaines intuitions spirituelles avant d'être immolée. Son sixième sens était suffisamment puissant pour qu'elle ait des prémonitions, mais celles-ci ressemblaient plus à des intuitions qu'à des pouvoirs surnaturels. Télékinésie. La projection astrale d'Alessa pouvait l'éviter et elle poussa Harry par télékinésie. Alessa également a érigé une sorte de champ de force qui empêchait Harry de la suivre. Cependant, cette barrière s'est avérée inutile contre les Floros. Pyrokinésie. Après avoir été brûlée par sa mère, Alessa a déclenché une vague de feu allumée par plusieurs bougies autour d'elle. Elle était aussi probablement la raison pour laquelle plusieurs incendies se sont séparés. Pour Travis, il l'a sauvée de l'incendie et de sa maison. Manipulation nocturne. Selon le guide de Silent Hill 3 Brady Game, Alessa pourrait transformer le jour en nuit, bien qu'il ne soit pas clair si elle pourrait toujours le faire ou si cela a fait référence au changement d'heure de la journée dans l'autre monde. Folie induite. Selon le guide Silent Hill 3 Brady Game, Alessa pourrait se rendre les gens fous en utilisant uniquement ses pensées. Série de films Silent Hill. Article principal, Alessa Gillespie. Film. Alessa Gillespie dans le film. Dans l'adaptation cinématographique de Silent Hill qui se déroule dans une continuité distincte de celle du jeu, Alessa Gillespie est représentée comme 3 entités distinctes partageant une même identité. Alessa, une femme adulte brûlée vive lorsqu'elle est enfant, confinée sur une civière d'hôpital. Dark Alessa, la partie corrompue d'Alessa, et Sharon da Silva, le côté innocent d'Alessa. La jeune Alessa est représentée par Jodelle Ferland, à l'âge adulte par Laurie Ayers. Comme dans la série de jeux, Alessa est décrite dans le film comme mystérieuse et comme une force motrice des événements qui se déroulent dans la ville. En plus d'être la créatrice des monstres vus dans les réalités alternatives, les pouvoirs d'Alessa sont minimisés dans le film et Dark Alessa remplit souvent les capacités surnaturelles d'Alessa. Cependant, Alessa utilise ses pouvoirs pour briser une chaîne en métal, faire fleurir les fleurs et créer le monde du brouillard et l'autre monde ainsi que pour créer 2 sosies d'elle-même. Alessa couverte de brûlures douloureuses. La version cinématographique d'Alessa est beaucoup plus vengeresse et déséquilibrée que son homologue du jeu et cherche à se venger des fanatiques religieux responsables de l'avoir brûlée, vive comme sorcière en 30 ans plus tôt. Contrairement à la série de jeux, le film montre qu'Alessa était responsable de la créatrice de la création de l'autre monde et du monde du brouillard, plutôt que d'utiliser une réalité existante à son avantage. Dans le premier film, il n'est jamais mentionné qu'Alessa était enceinte du dieu, ce que Révélation a établi. Le côté obscur d'Alessa dans l'Apocalypse. Dans Silent Hill Révélation, Alessa est interprétée par Erin Pitt. Le passé d'Alessa joue un rôle relativement mineur dans le film. Sa forme enfantine n'est vue qu'une seule fois, poussée et taquinée par ses camarades de classe. Son côté malveillant, Dark Alessa est vu en train de créer l'autre monde et d'attaquer les fanatiques. Une ancienne version de Dark Alessa est interprétée par Adelaide Clemens et affronte Heather Mason sur le carrousel et fusionne avec elle. Commentaire du créateur. Dans les premières étapes du développement, nous avons utilisé le nom de Asia, qui vient de la fille du réalisateur italien Dario Argento. Cependant, comme il s'agit d'un nom peu courant, nous avons décidé de la renommer. Citation Silent Hill Origine. Laisse-moi brûler à Travis. Silent Hill, maman. Non, éloigne-toi de moi. Maman, non, je ne veux pas le faire. Jouer au roman Silent Hill. Voilà, merci de m'avoir écouté. Merci d'avoir écouté cette histoire. Je vous retrouve bientôt pour une nouvelle vidéo sur les différentes créatures et les différentes personnes peuplant le monde de Silent Hill et pour ceux qui y sont liés. Je vous souhaite une bonne journée à vous. Merci beaucoup.
So here we are again. I hadn't exactly picked up Silent Hill 2 with the intention of covering the larger series on this channel. Back when I was making my Legacy of Kain series, my passion for writing and talking about the games had burnt out long before I even started working on editing the final video. And since this YouTube thing is just for fun, at least for the moment, I wanted to keep it to just playing and talking about only the games that I really wanted to, especially the retro stuff. Honestly, the last year and a half while I've been doing this has been a wonderful trip down memory lane for me. For whatever reason though, I quickly found myself installing Silent Hill 3 almost as soon as I'd put 2 down. Unlike 2, this wasn't a game that I felt I'd misunderstood or judged unfairly. I had a blast when I played through it the first time, and I'm still completely blown away by just how good this nearly 20-year-old game looks even now. That being said, enough time had passed since my last replay that I'd definitely forgotten large chunks of the game, and there was something wonderfully fresh about this replay. I likewise hadn't even intended on finishing a playthrough of the original game. I just wanted to shoot a couple of hours of stock footage to use in my previous video, and that really didn't work out the way I'd intended. So, here I now sit, able to talk at length about the legend of Silent Hill as both a story and as a game. I will say up front that it's basically impossible to talk about Silent Hill 3 without spoiling Silent Hill 1, and so moving forward, I will be doing that, and I won't be holding back. I will try to keep Silent Hill 3 specific spoilers to their own section, but I can't guarantee your safety 100%, so just be aware of that if you're going to watch the rest of this. Otherwise, just know that these games are awesome, and you absolutely should play them before watching this, or any other content made about them. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about the legend of Alessa Gillespie. The first Silent Hill is one of those interesting narratives where, much like the often misunderstood and criminally underappreciated BioShock Infinite, the point of view character is not actually the protagonist. Silent Hill starts with a car crash on a dark, foggy road, and follows the story of Harry Mason, a man of seemingly no consequence who is looking for his daughter in a town that is literally the stuff of nightmares. Somewhat disoriented from his accident, he's not entirely sure if the things he's seeing are real or some kind of delusion, or even if he's sleeping. He just knows that he needs to find his daughter and get out of here. Harry is really only a side character though, in a larger tale concerning old Lovecraftian horrors, a zealous cult, and a plot to bring about their so-called paradise on Earth, all revolving around one young girl named Alessa Gillespie. Harry is kind of a blank slate. He's not a bad character at all. In fact, I love Harry. He's a Chad tier Silent Hill protagonist, in both his incarnations I might add, along with Heather, who's the point of view character in 3. His somewhat weak characterization and overall lack of any kind of arc makes it very easy for us, the players, to map ourselves onto him. We do know a few things about him. Specifically that he and his wife were unable to have kids of their own, and that one day while driving down some unnamed road, they found an abandoned baby and decided to take it in and raise it themselves. Sometime after this, Harry's wife passed away, and he was left to raise the child by himself. Now, I'm not a father, but I can fully comprehend his motivation and drive, and understand why he just didn't run away screaming from this place the moment things started to get strange. So, Harry is fine. Harry can stay. But what I mean when I say he doesn't have an arc is there are no great revelations about him, or any great transformation by the end of the journey. All of that is reserved for Alessa, which is why we need to talk more about her. So let's get something out in the open right now. Harry's daughter Cheryl Mason and Alessa Gillespie are, more or less, the same person. Alessa, you see, is some kind of powerful psychic or witch depending on how you look at it. And she projected a piece of her soul to manifest as a small baby in the hope that at least a small part of her might know love and happiness and have something resembling a normal life. Why would she do that, you ask? Well, maybe her mother can help answer that question.
Stay back. Nothing is to be gained from floundering about at random. You must follow the path. The path of the hermit concealed by flowers.
So yeah, Dahlia Gillespie is a fanatic, raving madwoman. Well, actually, you see, I have some very strong views about organized religion. Let's just say Final Fantasy X has it right. So I don't know if Dahlia is mad or just brainwashed by existing in a small, insular community that associates any thoughts of questioning their beliefs as a crime worthy of the most horrific punishments. But either way, she is more than willing to subject her child to abuse in the name of strengthening her faith, and exploit it in the most horrific way in order to give birth to her so-called god. What this basically meant was Dahlia used her daughter for a horrific ritual, effectively burning her child alive so that she would give birth to the Order's monstrous deity. And in a desperate bid to prevent this from happening, and save some piece of herself, Alessa split her soul and let part of it escape free. The most heartbreaking part of all this is, despite everything Alessa had been through up to before the ritual, she still wanted the one thing every little girl wants.
Oh, but Mommy, I just want to be with you.
Of course, this wasn't the end of the story. While Cheryl got to live for 7 years as a happy normal girl with great parents, the rest of Alessa was kept alive in the basement of Alchemilia Hospital under the supervision of Dr. Kaufman and this wonderful woman right here, Lisa Garland. A plan was put in motion to keep Alessa alive, but in a coma, locked into a permanent nightmare. This nightmare would incubate the spirit of their god and allow it to grow so that when Cheryl could finally be called back to Silent Hill and united with Alessa, it could be born. And that's pretty much where our game starts. Rather than the subjective personal hell that James finds himself in, Harry is dealing with the nightmare of an abused child, literally bleeding into our own world as he stumbles around the city trying to piece things together. This is very evident from the locations we are drawn to, such as a school where we see evidence of bullying and segregation, and all of the medical horror we see scattered around the dark world. Enemies all seem to be flayed, with their skins raw and pink or infected with some kind of parasite. They look like the kinds of demons depicted in religious texts, or they reflect a child's fear of barking dogs. Everywhere, the world is filled with blood-soaked sheets and corroded metal. The dark world is a filthy, decaying place, and when we understand the mind which it's made from, it's not hard to see why. Silent Hill has multiple endings, though, unlike 2, we can clearly say that Harry is able to ultimately stop the God of the Order being born, and while Cheryl is reunited with Alessa and she finally dies at the completion of the ritual, Harry is given a baby by her as the dark world falls apart all around them, and they escape together to hopefully never have to deal with such horrors again. And with all that out of the way, it's time for us to meet Heather and talk about Silent Hill 3. So we begin in a familiar location to Silent Hill players in more ways than one. The Silent Hill amusement park is a location we visited in the first game, as is the dark world formed from Alessa's nightmares. Unlike Silent Hill 1 and 2 that wanted to take their time before sucking you into the worst they have to offer, Silent Hill 3 throws you in there right at the start. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for someone who played this as their first game in the series. All of the decay mixed with childhood memories is back, and this time... yeah, that actually got me the first time. This is hardly a tutorial though. I mean, the opening scene makes a point of showing that Heather has a knife, but doesn't bother to tell you that she's also packing a machine gun if you just open your inventory and check. That's okay though. This moment is meant to feel somewhat wild and frantic, and regardless of whether you fall to an enemy or manage to make it to the roller coaster, the outcome is very much the same. And cue the end of the nightmare scene, and we see Heather slowly coming to after seemingly blacking out in a coffee shop at her local shopping mall. Outside, the sun has turned red, and the place will soon close. And Heather is thinking she's long past due to be getting home, and makes a point of calling her father, just to let him know she's okay. Things seem... normal. Which is very uncommon in a Silent Hill game. We can hear the sounds of cars and life, and we even bump into another person, though this isn't the most pleasant of meetings. This fine gentleman is Douglas Cartland, and despite not showing any kind of ID and just randomly stopping Heather in a shopping mall, insists that he's a detective and that he's been looking for her. Heather, being a smart girl, doesn't agree to get into anything resembling a van with blacked out windows with him, and instead makes for the women's bathroom in a hope that she can shake this creep and escape to her house. Douglas tries to persuade her to come along by telling her it's about her birth and her true parents, but our girl Heather brushes it off, heads into the bathroom, and bolts for it out of the window. Now, were this any other situation, I'd call that a 10 out of 10 escape, and pat the young lady on the shoulder before handing her my phone so she can call the cops and get picked up safely by them. Unfortunately, this is a game titled Silent Hill, and it only takes a moment of Heather being separated from the rest of society for everything to literally go to hell. So for returning players, this may all seem a little familiar, except we're not in Silent Hill. At least, not as far as we know. At this point, we find ourselves in some sort of place between the real world and another. It looks like a shopping mall, much like Silent Hill looks like a town, but it's now full of strange, aggressive creatures. So you know it's only a matter of time before somebody shows up to speak in cryptic metaphors, and on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Claudia.
They've come to witness the beginning. The rebirth of paradise, despoiled by mankind.
She seems stable. And after that encounter, we enter an elevator and are gifted with something literally every Silent Hill fan knows all too well. And from here, it's another elevator ride all the way down to the depths of hell. Heather finds herself trapped in a world she's seen in more than a few of her nightmares now, and maybe that's why she can so easily accept what's happening to her, and not simply fall on the floor clutching her skull and jabbering. Much like Harry in the first Silent Hill, she's not altogether sure if what she's seeing is real or just a dream. She pushes on, and there are more than a couple of callbacks to both the previous Silent Hill games.
Forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
Before encountering the beast at the heart of this labyrinth, and when it falls down dead, the Dark World responds by spitting her out. So the rules are very well established now. We are back in the hell of Alessa Gillespie, and it is once again bleeding into our world and for some reason seems to be fixated on this girl Heather, and she, for the life of her, can't imagine why. Before leaving the mall, however, Heather once again bumps into Douglas, who confesses that Claudia was the one who hired him to track her down, but he had no knowledge of her motives or what might happen once he did. Heather, being somewhat skeptical however, decides it's better to try to get home alone, and this is where things start to get really strange. This particular section is actually my favourite part of the game, and I'll be diving into it much deeper later on, but before we go any further, it's time to put up that big spoiler flag. I mean, I have a sneaky suspicion that even if you haven't played this game yet, you're already well on your way to figuring out where all this is going, but as a responsible writer, I feel I should warn you up front and tell you to skip ahead to the appropriate timestamp right about now. So when Heather finally makes it home, we are met with a heartbreaking sight. She comes home to find her father, Harry Mason, dead in his chair. That's right, the bastards literally killed the hero of Silent Hill 1 off camera. It's something of a Stephen King move to casually murder beloved characters in a single sentence, and good God did this one hit me right between the eyes. So if we know Harry is Heather's father, then I think we can figure out who she is. That's right, the reborn baby of Cheryl Mason from the end of the first game. The last piece of the soul of Alessa Gillespie. It's all coming together now. Heather once again encounters Claudia atop the roof of her apartment building, where she is invited to come and find her in Silent Hill. And with nothing left to live for and revenge consuming her mind, she's more than happy to oblige. And Douglas, feeling responsible for so much of this now, is willing to take her there. Piecing together the story from her father's old journal and something like repressed memories from another life, she comes to understand what's going on. The Order is still very much alive, and they still want Alessa to birth their god. The final part of the game sees Heather re-exploring the hospital from Silent Hill 2, which is a wonderful little callback if I do say so myself. After dealing with the various crazy things therein, it soon becomes apparent that Heather is herself pregnant with the Order's god. She finally heads to the amusement park from her nightmares at the start of the game, pushing deep into the heart of the Dark Realm and facing off against Claudia. There's something of an interesting bit of Deus Ex Machina here. You see, in Silent Hill 1, a red liquid called agloophytis is introduced to us. Initially found in the hospital, it can be collected and used as a weapon to save one of the characters who has become possessed by some kind of parasite. It seems this substance is well attuned for exorcising demons, and if you save a certain doctor in the city, he'll turn up at the end and hurl a batch of this onto Alessa, forcing the god of Silent Hill to show its true face in the form of the demon Incubus. From the very start of the game, Heather has a pendant in her possession that has a strange red substance inside it. Now, returning champions to this game may be able to figure out what this red pill is inside the pendant, but for new players, there isn't much in the way of a hint. So, when we face off against Claudia, there comes a point where the god will literally burst out of Heather if she tries to attack her, and the only thing you can do is swallow this pill to exorcise it from your body. Claudia, however, doesn't react to this in any kind of measured way.
Goddess.
Claudia!
And so Heather must enter the very heart of the Order's twisted world for the final battle with their dark god. So if we're going to talk characters, we may as well start with our heroine and point of view character, Heather. The theme of being stalked and hunted by an oppressive power is very prevalent throughout this entire game. Unlike Silent Hill 2, which chooses to manifest this as a single, powerful being, Heather is just beset by weirdos and the horrific force of the actual town chasing her down, breaking into her safe spaces, hurting her family, taking away her security and stability, and I'd say overall, she handles it like an absolute boss. While some of the dialogue choices are questionable in this game,
Well, I guess you're not a person anyway.
I'm not a big fan of sassy protagonists. It doesn't make them look strong or cool, and is very out of place in this setting in particular. And there's a couple of fourth wall breaking moments. However, Heather is a well-written, strong protagonist. For every line of dialogue that seems jarring or inappropriate, there's an equally well-written scene of her going through considerable emotional turmoil, as well as questioning her sanity and her grasp on reality. Her journey is a very dark one. She's being hounded by things that would terrify people to the point of breaking, and yet she keeps powering through. And when these things ultimately destroy her world, rather than trying to escape from them, she barrels ahead into it, partly as a way to get revenge, and partly out of understanding that this is the only way out of this nightmare. Heather, like Harry in the first game, is a Chad tier Silent Hill protagonist, but she's still a teenage girl at the end of it all. And while this isn't exactly her first trip to hell, and her family no doubt prepared her in some way, this isn't something anyone should have to deal with. Her characterization is overall much stronger than Harry's, but even as a guy, I found it quite easy to map myself onto her and empathize with what she's going through. She's an endearing character, and I was rooting for her the whole time. Silent Hill wouldn't be Silent Hill though, if we didn't have at least a couple of very strange characters babbling incomprehensible things at our protagonist and then disappearing, and this game has some of the best. One of whom is a rather bizarre ghost stalker named Stanley that manifests as a series of obsessive notes and a doll that Heather refuses to touch. And it gets especially weird as, on one hand, it feels like these notes were written some time ago, but they also seem to know how she's reacting to them, and my god, do they get weird. We do find some medical reports about Stanley that refer to his fixation on one particular girl, but we never actually meet him, which may be for the best, all things considered. The two major supporting cast members here are Claudia and Vincent, who both bring their own brand of crazy into the arena. We meet Vincent in the Dark World in my absolute favourite area in the game, the Hilltop Center, where he feels the best way to endear himself to a young girl who's lost and thinks she's possibly going out of her mind is to talk like this.
Doesn't this place get to you at all?
Oh, it gets to me all right. I find it most fascinating.
Yeah, maybe get a different book of pickup lines there, fella. Vincent is a member of the religious order that is responsible for creating this whole mess, but overall doesn't seem as devout or brainwashed as other members we've encountered so far. For one, he seems well aware that what he's seeing all around him isn't some fabled paradise, and he makes it openly known that he's opposed to Claudia and doesn't want her plan to rebirth the city's god to come to fruition.
I don't want God to be born. Wouldn't be convenient.
If, like me, you enjoy reading too much into this, then you could easily start making all kinds of comparisons with real-world figures who've worked themselves into powerful niches and are so scared of change that could possibly disrupt their status and comfort that they openly sabotage the very ideas they are supposed to stand for. On the other hand, Vincent could just be an opportunist who was always out for himself to begin with, or maybe his idea of paradise on Earth doesn't include all this excessive suffering. On the other side, we have Claudia, who is the game's major antagonist and, much like Alessa, is something of a tragic story. Western religion as a whole is very harsh on women, and it seems Silent Hill's order isn't any different there either. Claudia is the daughter of Leonard Wolf, who was a high-ranking member of the order, and who was a very abusive parent as demonstrated by this line here.
The memory of his cruelty is forever burned into my mind.
Of course, Leonard would have you believe that everything he did was for her good because, again, an insular community that considers any questioning or argument of their belief to be worthy of eternal damnation. He himself is eventually committed to the psychiatric ward of Brookhaven Hospital, when his religious zeal leads him to stabbing another member of the Order. As we discover later, he clearly has his own very strong feelings about the direction the Order should be taking things, and he uses his faith and the belief in his God as a way to, in his mind, elevate himself above the rest of the people of the world who he judges as unworthy. Our first encounter with him goes something like this.
Hello?
Claudia.
No, I'm not.
Don't lie to me, Claudia. You're always trying to run from your responsibilities. Have you come to apologize? Or maybe you still don't realize how foolish you've been.
And once we get into the depths of the Dark World and find him, well, let's just say his true colors are very much on display here. So, given the horrors her own upbringing and a lifetime of being literally brainwashed into thinking that everyone outside her small insular community is a terrible person, we can kind of forgive Claudia for being the way she is. In fact, her goals are, in her own mind, noble and virtuous. She thinks what she's doing is going to save the world and the souls of all the people, and doesn't seem to consider that no one asked her to do any of that on their behalf in the first place. Claudia's beliefs and motivations don't do much to endear Heather to her though, considering the circumstances under which they meet. I can't, however, talk about this wonderful cast of characters without bringing up Douglas, who, despite his first impressions, turns out to be a really well-written and endearing character. In truth, he's just a guy doing a job. We discover later in the game that Claudia wasn't entirely honest with him about Heather at all, claiming she'd been kidnapped, which is, at best, a loose interpretation of a half-truth. It certainly wasn't explained to Douglas the kind of life she'd been taken away from, or even if Heather was happy with the one she had now. Later on, he decides to pour out some of his tragic backstory, concerning a son who got himself killed robbing a bank because his father couldn't pay the rent for himself. I will say that while some of the voice acting and dialogue choices in this game are questionable, his voice actor Richard Gross really lands this scene. His relationship with Heather goes from strength to strength, with him going from being an unwelcome stalker, to a friend, to someone who she doesn't want to lose. That feeling is clearly returned when it occurs to Douglas that maybe this nightmare might stop if Heather simply died, but is unable to pull the trigger. I mean, come on. Regardless of anything else, Heather is still just a teenager who's been pulled into a situation that she didn't ask for. Silent Hill 1 very much laid out the rules of what we can expect when we come here, and since Silent Hill 3 is a direct follow-on to that, I feel like 1 is a good place to begin with. In the first game, we are hit with a brief all-at-once taste of what we're going to be in for, when, while Harry is chasing what he thinks is his daughter down a foggy alleyway, the world very suddenly switches from day to night. And as Harry pushes on, with only the faint flicker of his Zippo to guide him, things start to get very bizarre. This climaxes with him stumbling into this, and then dying at the hands of some early game enemies. Moments later, however, Now, a lot is going on here, and Silent Hill 1 plays with the idea of dreams more than any other game in the series, which I absolutely love, and it may be the thing that, for all its flaws, places this entry above 2 and 3 in my book. From here though, things are pretty slow paced, and quite a bit of exploration of the town is needed before we get to the school, which is our first real point of interest in the game. The regular town has plenty of danger, and the enemies in this game are in general much faster than Harry. They outnumber him, and it's quite easy to get swarmed by them, so you're going to be doing a lot of running away, and that is very much the survival horror way. It's only after finding several keys and unlocking a back door in a house that we get our second significant reality shift, with the world once again going dark. And we still don't get a look at the true nightmare world again until we've explored the school in its entirety and solved another few puzzles involving a clock tower. All the while, the sound design slowly ramps up the pressure, telling us something big is coming until we finally get into the small room beneath the clock tower, and it all goes quiet again. That is, except for this sound. My god, this game. But the school is small fry, believe me. However awesome that is, it pales in comparison to the hospital, and I've no doubt the exploration of this place and the horrific medical staff we encounter within is exactly what sealed it as a critical location in literally every other game to come out bearing this name. The truly terrifying thing about the hospital is that, in many ways, we don't even leave. Or maybe we do. Maybe it's all a dream. Or maybe the part where we escape is a dream. I have no idea. Our first trip there ends when we encounter Lisa Garland. Sorry, I didn't mean to cry, it's just... Why couldn't we have got here sooner? So, this is the first of several very bizarre encounters with this woman. She can only be found in this room, in the Dark World specifically, and at one point when Harry suggests she come with him, she says she feels like she's not supposed to leave this place. But just let's go through the steps of these interactions here. In the Nightmare World, Harry meets Lisa. They talk, and then that sound again. Harry blacks out and wakes up in the same room in the regular world. Later, when Harry is pulled into the Nightmare World through the altar in the antique shop, he wakes up in the same room with Lisa, who insists that he was just having a bad dream. And then he blacks out again shortly after. Harry is then able to move through the Dark World from the antique shop back to the hospital, where he can meet Lisa again, at which point she says she's glad to see him and was so scared of being all alone, as though he did actually leave the hospital and wasn't just lying on the bed having nightmares the whole time. Finally, after encountering Alessa at the amusement park and blacking out, he wakes up on the floor in the room with Lisa as though he never left there at all. I mean, I just can't even. There isn't a single Silent Hill game that has played so loose with reality and the concept of dreams quite like this one, even baking it into some of its level design, which is something we will definitely talk about later. So in Silent Hill 3, the hell world of Alessa Gillespie's nightmare is back, and it looks absolutely glorious. This is a land of medical torture and religious fear. The creatures within are formed from some horrific mashup of Judeo-Christian demons and childhood fears, and then distorted into something truly alien. The walls are lined with rust and rot and blood, and we catch this guy moving about the place a lot. But here's the thing, most of this game doesn't even take place in Silent Hill. The goalposts, it seems, have been moved. Only the latter third of this game takes place within the titular town, and sees us revisiting the Brookhaven Hospital and the Silent Hill amusement park. The majority of the game, however, takes place somewhere else. Now, the mall where all this starts is a perfectly serviceable environment, with a breathtaking boss fight at its core. But for me, things peak a little after that when we get to the Hilltop Center. Prior to this, we've already dealt with a bizarre subway station, a sewage works that has clearly been dealing with monsters for quite a while, and a construction site that brings us to this place. And I don't know why I like this place so much. I just do. I think it's because it looks so mundane. Silent Hill has conditioned us to accept the odd juxtaposition of the mundane and horrific, with the way everyone in the town just seemed to vanish one day. But the perpetual fog reminds us that we're in Silent Hill, and we should expect this kind of thing. Here though, it all seems just a little too normal, too clean. By contrast, the locations in Silent Hill 2 have a sense of decay about them. Even in the real world, they seem dirtier than they should be. In Silent Hill 3 though, things start off in the staff areas of a shopping mall and pretty much everything seems normal until we see... There are other mundane locations like the most famous bakery in the world of gaming. And even areas where we can almost touch the outside world. The shopping mall, however, is a little too eager to pull you down into the dark world. But we get quite a bit of time to meander around the hilltop centre before we once again slip into the dark place. Maybe it just speaks to my own interest in seemingly forgotten spaces, but there's something quite fascinating for me about exploring here. Even though it's night and it's dark, it doesn't feel like it should be empty, and it just creates a real sense of curiosity for me. It's almost a shame when we get this very jarring shift into the nightmare world because seeing all these horrors there makes perfect sense to me, but seeing it in this otherwise mundane space is what really sets my imagination racing. I don't know, I'm just babbling. Hopefully, by the time I've finished editing this, it'll all make some kind of sense. Hopefully. Another area I enjoy is without a doubt the haunted house in the Silent Hill amusement park. As a child, I was perpetually scared of imagined ghosts and other horrors on account of a very overactive imagination. In fact, my fascination with horror and what actually makes us scared may very well have stemmed from a desire to overcome a crippling fear of the dark that was no doubt a huge drain on my parents when I was growing up. So, even though I was easily scared, going on tacky amusement park haunted house attractions was something I did a lot when I was a kid. This was possibly to prove something to myself, to stare into the abyss as you might say, and while I generally finished the ride feeling good about myself, except this one time, we won't talk about that. It was usually later that night when I'd think about how the things in that house might be coming to get me and take me back there. As a result of nesting in existing, if not extremely dated firmware in my brain, this place comes off as very creepy. And the moment I saw that red light for the first time, you can bet I was running my ass off before I even gave any thought to what it might mean. Easily my biggest disappointment here is just how little we get to re-explore the town of Silent Hill. I mean, we get a few cool callbacks to Silent Hill 2. And of course, due to the subjective nature of the Hal James experiences, it's going to be different, but damn it would have been cool if just a little more of the town had been open and a few more Easter eggs had been hidden around. Of course, I understand there are always constraints on video game development. Time and money are not an infinite resource on any project, after all. And simply placing the town down and having it serve no purpose would both confuse the player and waste a lot of people's time. But come on, the bowling alley maybe? Or just a little of the park or something? It's a nitpick really, but still. I wonder if modders have been able to break beyond the game's roadblocks and see what's hidden beyond. The difference between Silent Hill 1 and 3 sometimes feels like night and day. Certainly the first game did an incredible job of squeezing as much potential out of the PlayStation's chipset as possible, but it really shows its age these days. Silent Hill 3 on the other hand, thanks to 4K textures being packaged with the PC version of the game, still looks absolutely amazing even now. But it's not all about graphics and pretty textures. Silent Hill 1 may have the most dated visuals, but it has the largest and most sprawling version of the town, and there's a hell of a lot of backtracking in that game. On the other hand, the Dark World in Silent Hill 3 is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, God, just look at this place. There's something so very claustrophobic about this world, and the deeper you descend into it and the longer you spend with it all around you, you can't help but want to come up for air. It's a very stressful place to explore, just because it's so relentless. Between the implied medical horror, the rot and rust, the constant noise of all the different things around you, and the very intimidating challenge of navigating this place, it's not exactly a pleasant stroll through the park. Then there's the constant waves of monsters that beset you. Silent Hill 2 very specifically set out to create creatures that were based around the human form, and somewhat sexualized, as a way to portray James's broken psyche. From the mannequin beasts to the nurses, everything feels familiar, and could almost be mistaken for regular people when seen from a distance through a thick veil of fog. Silent Hill 3, however, gets a lot more creative in this area. Or, at the very least, the leash was clearly taken off here. In the first game, the creatures were recognizable as demons for the most part. Since these are the nightmares of a helpless little girl who's had her head filled with religious dogma from abusive parents, it's not surprising that flayed winged beasts, barking dogs, and even giant insects are part of this nightmare world. Silent Hill 3 keeps the dogs and introduces one other extremely annoying enemy, but also has vast towering creatures that stalk after Heather. It's been argued by men of narrower minds and greater YouTube popularity than I that the monsters in Silent Hill 3 have no symbolic meaning as compared to Silent Hill 2, for example. However, the vast size of some of these creatures and the way even the small ones can swarm and bully you seems quite symbolic of how a woman being stalked or abused may well see her tormentors. On top of that, there's also some wonderful foreshadowing of the greatly inferior horror title, Five Nights at Freddy's. And that will be the only time I ever acknowledge these games' existence, as they are objectively terrible, should not be played by anyone, and they clearly needed whatever help they could get to try and get attention. One of the best things in Silent Hill 3 is seeing familiar locations from Silent Hill 1 remade for the PlayStation 2 era. The most notable locations are the amusement park, and very specifically the merry-go-round that serves as a significant boss arena in both games. In the first game, the fate of Sybil, a very important character, will be decided here, and in the third, we wind up in a confrontation with a very angry memory that probably forms the most challenging encounter in the game. I mean, it can be cheesed, no doubt, but it just keeps coming. Then later in the endgame labyrinth, we get to visit both Alessa's room at Al Camilla Hospital and the room in her house which serves as the final barrier between you and the final boss in both the first and third games. They are wonderful little callbacks and put as much of a smile on my face as Douglas claiming he visited this town once on a missing persons case concerning a young man who came here and was never seen again. Now, who could that have been, I wonder? If I have one complaint about 3 though, it's that the game is too quick to pull you down into its dark world and keeps you there for far too long. As mentioned before, Silent Hill 1 is a relatively slow burn from leaving the restaurant where the game starts to entering the dark world through fairly subtle means. But Silent Hill 3 seems to be in quite a rush to get you in there and is far less subtle about the transitions. Maybe this is in some way symbolic of the way the dark world is forcing its way into a realm that is beyond its usual scope, but it's something that I think should have been handled with a little more subtlety. I will say that I really like the way it's handled in the hospital, but the rest could have used a little more thought. Also, as I said before, there's something about seeing Silent Hill monstrosities in completely mundane environments outside of the town without the fog that really serves to make them all the more creepy. I'm quite conditioned to seeing them in their own realm, but finding them in a dance studio in a locked shopping mall is something a little more unnerving if you ask me, as are these mannequins right here. I don't have a whole heap of extra thinking to add to the gameplay section from my Silent Hill 2 review, as mechanically these games are, more or less, exactly the same. If you want to hear my full thoughts on the way this game runs, then head over there and take a listen. There are a few Silent Hill 1 and 3 specific things to bring up though. Firstly, as far as enemy variety and combat goes, these games are much better than 2. There's not only more variety, but they move faster and come at you in greater numbers, making standing and fighting, especially with a melee weapon, a very bad idea indeed. That makes these games overall better survival horror experiences than 2, as in 2, you can melee weapon your way through most of the regular enemies early game, and have more than enough ammunition for anything that the late game throws at you. Using close quarter weapons is possible in this game, but it's much more of a risk as these enemies are much faster to counterattack, and it's pretty easy to wind up mobbed by a group if you stand in one place for too long. It's also possible for enemies you'd thought you'd killed to simply have returned to life the next time you enter a room, making any bullets or health pickups you spent on putting them down the first time a wasted investment. I don't actually know if that part is intentional, a bug, or something brought on by the game being old and probably not the most stable, but it really just boils down to running like hell as much as possible. There's an interesting mechanic where you can place down food on the floor to distract the enemies, but I found it to be very hit and miss, and overall it didn't contribute enough for me to want to use it. There are some very annoying creatures. These ones called slurpers in particular are easily the worst and knock Heather over a lot, making hitting them with your katana a less viable option than simply blowing holes into them, and I probably burnt through a little more shotgun ammo than I would have liked taking my revenge on these freaks. This is actually a problem, because I really don't think a game should be pissing its players off. I fully support the idea of having challenging enemies in a survival horror game, but given there are entire Reddit threads dedicated to how much people hate these things, I'd say there's something that needs fixing there. One major upside to this is a sense of desperation that happens as you explore areas. As mentioned before, Silent Hill levels were designed as real-world locations first, and then crafted into levels by making only certain doors accessible to the player. You'll usually fully explore a location in both the real and dark world, with the layout shifting as you do, and new puzzles, locks, keys and encounters emerging in the transition. So when you've got 3 nurses stalking you down a corridor and you're smashing that action button against every door only to be told the lock is broken and can't be opened, you start to feel the panic of your impending doom approaching. There is one big issue here, and it's right here in the hospital. What the hell is going on here? While animated textures may serve to add something great in terms of atmosphere to a scene, it makes it basically impossible to find the frickin' doors in these corridors, and that is annoying as hell. Back in my Mark of the Ninja review, we discussed the process that went into creating the experience for the player. One thing Clay Entertainment wanted to eliminate was anything muddy. Anything that wasn't clear to the player. After all, in high-stakes games like stealth or survival horror, where you can die enough from your own stupidity, you don't want bad game design choices making things even more difficult. I had to continually open my map and check to see if I was next to these doors, and I still had to run up and down these corridors 2 or 3 times to find them all. And that is not okay when you've got these annoying little things chasing you down and bowling you over. If you're thinking this is all contributing to the survival horror feel, well, I have to strongly disagree. None of the Resident Evil enemies are annoying, but they are all very dangerous. And while the camera angles do conceal things, I never once had to struggle to find a door. So this was a bad choice. It is, however, only confined to one section, so it can be forgiven. Silent Hill 1, 2 and 3 all feature late game labyrinths of one sort or another. In 2, it happened beneath the Silent Hill Historical Society, which becomes an old prison, which becomes something else entirely. 3 has its own version that is found through venturing through the amusement park into the Church of the Order and into the place beyond. But I honestly think Silent Hill 1's is the best. Why? Well, because it's made up of pieces of the rest of the game. It's like a little walking tour of everything you've been through so far. The best part is, you will actually find puzzles that you'll have to deal with in this place the first time you visit these places too. For example, on your first trip to the hospital, we'll encounter a VCR player in a room, and later find a tape that can be played on it. But you are now locked out of that area. However, you'll get your chance to finally watch the tape when you stumble back into that room again in the endgame. There's actually quite a few of these moments, and as far as I'm aware, no other Silent Hill game has implemented a system like this. It's really cool foreshadowing, and I still get a kick out of seeing all this come together, even now. The legend of Alessa Gillespie is one hell of a story. It is a tale of the worst extremes of organised religion within an insular community with a good smattering of Lovecraftian horror thrown in for good measure. In truth, the real monsters in this game are not the demons and gods of the dark place, but the people who are so willing to hurt and exploit others in the name of their faith. Alessa and Claudia were both born into a cult and never had any choice in being part of that. They were punished severely for any thoughts that they had that deviated from the cult's doctrine, and faced with the ultimate punishment of being cast out, losing their friends, family, and every connection they ever had in the world if they didn't conform. Alessa was finally exploited in the worst possible way to create a literal hell and inflict that on others. The entire town of Silent Hill suffered for this exploitation, and many good people died. I won't drive the symbolism home too hard. After all, not everyone who has a belief or is part of an organized religion is a raving fanatic. We are all lost and alone in this cold, empty universe, desperately trying to extract some kind of meaning from our existence. And if you can find that in some kind of faith, well, that's not all that bad, providing what you believe doesn't harm or oppress others who don't share your worldview. These two games are one hell of a wild ride down into the darkest depths of human suffering. They are genre-defining titles that have caught the imaginations of so many people. They are much-loved properties that really deserve so much better from their own creators. Yes, I'm looking at you, Konami. How are you not on top of preserving these? Either way, it's been a blast to take a trip back to Toluca Lake and walk with Harry, James, and Heather one more time. I shall make a point of not leaving it so long next time. Actually, there may be one more walk in Harry's boots coming sometime soon, but not just yet, I think. So, since we are dealing with the PlayStation 2 and an era when Konami actually used to not only make games, but made some of the most incredible titles in the medium, I thought we'd take a look at another title they made. Something completely different to almost everything else they've ever done. Not a series or a franchise, but a single, very strange story. We're going to head to a little German town called Lebensborn and meet a young man named Ike Kusch, a man who unfortunately is living the very last day of his life. For you see, Ike now stands beneath the shadow of destiny. Well, hello you. Welcome to the super secret part of the video just for people who watch all the way to the very end. I am very proud of this little scene I made here, and more so that it only took me a couple of hours. I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for seeing this all the way through to the end, and especially to those of you that keep coming back and keep leaving me comments. Even though it's only a few of you, it really helps with my motivation, and keeps me inspired to keep trying at this. So, thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you back here again for more, real soon.